The sun beat down on the dusty plains, baking the earth a dry, cracked brown. For 12 long years, Thorne Whitmore had been a ghost in this landscape, a shadow moving through the empty rooms of his once vibrant ranch. The laughter of children, the warm embrace of his wife, all gone, swallowed by a tragedy he couldn't outrun. Now, only the wind whispered through the tall grass, a constant reminder of what he had lost. His ranch house stood weathered and worn, much like Thorne himself. The paint peeled from the wooden siding, and the porch sagged under the weight of neglect. He rarely ventured into town, preferring the solitude, the quiet broken only by the creak of the windmill and the mournful howl of coyotes in the distance. Each day was the same, tending to the few head of cattle he still kept, fixing fences and trying, without success, to forget. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished. A worn leather armchair sat in front of the cold fireplace, a testament to happier times. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows. A single photograph sat on the mantelpiece. Thorne, his wife, and 2 young children, all smiling brightly. He hadn't touched it in years, but he couldn't bring himself to take it down. It was a painful reminder, but also a precious link to the past. Thorne was a tall man, weathered by the sun and wind. His face was etched with deep lines, telling a story of hardship and sorrow. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now guarded and distant. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn denim jeans, and dusty cowboy boots. A wide-brimmed hat shielded his face from the relentless sun. He carried himself with a weary stoop, as if the weight of his memories was too heavy to bear. He spent most of his days outside, finding a small measure of peace in the physical labor. The rhythmic swing of the hammer, the feel of the reins in his hands. These are the things that kept him going, that kept him from succumbing to the darkness that threatened to engulf him. He avoided conversation, avoided people. The less he had to do with the world, the better. He'd built high fences around his property, not just to keep the cattle in, but to keep the world out. He wanted nothing to do with it. He was content, or as content as a man could be, to live out his days in quiet isolation, a solitary figure against the vast, unforgiving landscape. He was a ghost, haunting his own life. He didn't expect anything to change. He didn't want it to, but the desert had other plans. That change arrived on a hot afternoon, the air thick with the smell of dust and sagebrush. Thorne was repairing a section of fence along the southern boundary of his property, the rhythmic clang of the hammer a familiar comfort. He'd been so lost in his work, so absorbed in the simple task, that he almost didn't see her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage shimmering in the heat. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, slumped against the fence, her body limp and unmoving. He dropped his hammer, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver holstered at his hip. He hadn't drawn a weapon in years, but old habits died hard. As he got closer, he could see that she was young, her face pale and drawn, streaked with dirt and sweat. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and a dark stain bloomed on the fabric of her shirt. "Hello," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you all right?" She didn't respond. He knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't been this close to another human being in what felt like a lifetime. He gently touched her shoulder. "Mom." Her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Her eyes, wide and filled with terror, locked onto his. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." He could see the fear in her eyes, a raw, desperate plea that resonated deep within him. It was the same fear he had seen in his own reflection for so many years. He knew, in that instant, that he couldn't turn away. "What happened?" he asked, his voice softening. "They're coming," she said, her voice trembling. "They're going to kill me." "Who's coming?" "Men from Dead Rock Canyon." He knew the name. Dead Rock Canyon was a lawless place, a haven for outlaws and bandits. He had always avoided it, knowing that nothing good ever came from that forsaken place. "Why are they after you?" he asked. She hesitated, her eyes darting around as if she expected them to appear at any moment. I saw something, she finally said. Something I shouldn't have. He looked at her closely, seeing the desperation in her face, the genuine terror in her eyes. He knew he should turn her away, that getting involved would only bring trouble to his door. But he couldn't. He saw a flicker of himself in her, a reflection of the pain and loss that had haunted him for so long. "What's your name?" he asked. "Serafina," she whispered. "Serafina Caldwell." "All right, Serafina," he said, his voice firm. "I'm Thorin Whitmore, and I'm going to help you." He carefully lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was. He carried her towards the house, his mind racing. He knew he was making a mistake, that he was inviting danger into his life. But he couldn't leave her there to die. He had made his choice. He would protect her, no matter the cost. Inside the house, Thorn laid Serafina on the worn sofa in the living room. The room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn to keep out the harsh sunlight. Serafina shivered despite the heat. Thorn quickly built a fire in the fireplace, the flames crackling and casting dancing shadows on the walls. He fetched a basin of water and some clean cloth from a kitchen. He gently cleaned the wound on her shoulder, wincing at the sight of it. It was a deep gash, likely caused by a knife. "This looks bad," he said, his voice concerned. "I need to stitch it up." Serafina nodded, her face pale. I can handle it," she whispered. Thorn rummaged through a dusty box in the corner of the room, finally finding a needle and thread. He sterilized them over the fire, his hands steady despite the tremor in his heart. He had tended to injuries before, mostly on animals, but never on a person. As he stitched the wound, Serafina bit her lip, trying to suppress a cry of pain. Thorn worked quickly and efficiently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he was finished, he bandaged the wound tightly. "That should do it," he said. "Try to rest." He brought her a blanket and a cup of water. Serafina drank it gratefully, her eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me." "Don't mention it," Thorn replied, turning away. He felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the vulnerability in her eyes. "They're really bad men," Serafina said, her voice trembling. "They won't stop until they find me." "I know," Thorn said, "but they won't find you here." He went outside and scanned the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the plains. He could see no sign of anyone, but he knew they were out there, somewhere, searching for Serafina. He returned to the house and began to barricade the doors and windows, pushing heavy furniture against them. He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. He hadn't fired a gun in anger in years, but he knew he could still handle one. Serafina watched him from the sofa, her eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Getting ready," Thorn said grimly. "They'll be here soon." He knew he was putting himself in danger, that he was risking everything he had. But he couldn't turn back now. He had made a promise to protect Serafina, and he intended to keep it. He would face the men from Dead Rock Canyon, and he would make sure that Serafina was safe, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He owed her that much. He owed himself that much. It was time to stop running from his past and face the present, no matter how dangerous it might be. He was no longer a ghost. He was a protector. As darkness fell, Thorn sat by the window, watching the empty plains. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting flickering shadows on Serafina's sleeping face. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He thought about his family, about the day they were taken from him. He had been helpless then, unable to protect them. The memory still haunted him, a constant ache in his heart. He remembered the sheriff telling him there was nothing he could do, that the men responsible were long gone. He'd felt a rage then, a burning desire for revenge, but it had slowly faded into a cold, empty despair. He had retreated into himself, building walls around his heart, shutting out the world. But Serafina, she had broken through those walls. He saw his own pain reflected in her eyes, the same fear, the same desperation. He couldn't stand by and watch her suffer the same fate as his family. He had to do something. He had to protect her. He thought about the men from Dead Rock Canyon. He knew their reputation. They were ruthless, cruel, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who stood in their way. He was just one man, an old rancher who hadn't fired a gun in years. What chance did he have against them? But he wasn't just fighting for Serafina. He was fighting for himself, for a chance to redeem himself, to prove that he wasn't helpless. He was fighting against the darkness that had consumed him for so long. He glanced at Serafina again. She was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed. He wondered what she had seen, what had made her run from Dead Rock Canyon. He knew it must have been something terrible. He stood up and walked over to the mantelpiece. He picked up the photograph of his family, his fingers tracing their faces. He felt a surge of emotion, a mix of love, grief, and anger. "I won't let it happen again," he whispered. "I promise." He put the photograph back on the mantelpiece and turned to face the darkness. He was ready. He would fight for Serafina, and he would fight for his own soul. He would not let the men from Dead Rock Canyon take another innocent life. He would not let the darkness win. He checked his rifle again, his hands steady. He knew what he had to do. He had to protect Serafina, and he had to stop the men from Dead Rock Canyon. It was a dangerous mission, but he was ready to face it. He was no longer a ghost. He was a warrior. He was Thorne Whitmore, and he would not be defeated. Serafina woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket around her. Thorne was still by the window, watching the planes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing," Thorne said, turning to face her. "Just keeping watch." He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot he had brewing on the stove. She took it gratefully, her hands shaking slightly. "You should tell me what happened," Thorne said, his voice gentle. "Why are those men after you?" Serafina hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected someone to be listening. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was working at the saloon in Dead Rock Canyon," she said. I was a waitress." She paused, as if the memory was too painful to bear. "One night," she continued, "I was cleaning up after closing. Everyone else had left. I heard voices in the back room, the owner's office." She took another deep breath. "I want to see what was going on." The door was slightly open. I peeked inside. Her voice cracked. I saw them killing a man. The owner, Jedediah Stone, and 2 other men. They were beating him. Then Stone, he shot him." Thorne listened intently, his face grim. "I didn't know what to do," Serafina said. "I was so scared. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I reached your fence." Tears streamed down her face. Thorne handed her a cloth. "Why did they kill him?" Thorne asked. "I don't know," Serafina said. "I didn't hear what they were saying. I just saw them killing him." "Did they see you?" "I don't think so," Serafina said. "But they must have figured out that someone saw them. That's why they're looking for me." Thorne nodded. It made sense. They couldn't afford to have a witness. Serafina was a threat to them, and they would do anything to silence her. "Jedediah Stone," Thorne said. "He's a dangerous man. He runs Dead Rock Canyon. The sheriff is in his pocket. There's no law there." "I know," Serafina said. "That's why I didn't go to the sheriff." "You did the right thing," Thorne said. "Coming here." He stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light across the plains. He knew the men from Dead Rock Canyon would be coming soon. He could feel it in his bones. "We need to get you out of here," Thorne said. "Before they arrive." "Where can I go?" Serafina asked, her voice filled with despair. "They'll find me wherever I go." "I know a place," Thorne said. "A place they'll never think to look." But as Thorne looked out at the approaching dawn, he knew they wouldn't have time to escape. Even if they left now, the riders would easily track them across the open plains. Their best chance was to stay and fight to defend the ranch. "We're not going anywhere," Thorne said, his voice firm. "We're going to stay and fight." Serafina looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Fight? But I don't know how to fight." "I'll teach you," Thorne said. "It's not as hard as you think." He retrieved a revolver from a locked box in the bedroom. It was an old weapon, but well-maintained. He showed Serafina how to hold it, how to aim, how to fire. "The key is to stay calm," he said. "Don't panic. Take your time. Aim carefully. And don't be afraid to shoot." He took her outside and showed her how to use the fences and outbuildings for cover. He explained how to reload quickly, how to conserve ammunition. He taught her everything he knew about survival, about fighting dirty. Serafina was a quick learner. She listened intently, her fear slowly replaced by a steely determination. She practiced aiming and firing, her hand growing steadier with each shot. "You're a natural," Thorn said, a hint of a smile on his face. "I don't want to kill anyone," Serafina said, her voice somber. "You may have to," Thorn said, "to protect yourself, to protect me." He showed her how to load the rifle, how to use the sights. He explained the importance of knowing her surroundings, of being aware of potential threats. They worked together for hours, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. They moved furniture to create barricades inside the house, reinforcing the doors and windows. They gathered ammunition and supplies. They were ready. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thorn saw a dust cloud on the horizon. The riders were coming. "They're here," he said, his voice calm. "Remember everything I taught you. Stay calm. Aim carefully, and don't be afraid to shoot." He took his position by the window, his rifle in hand. Serafina stood beside him, her revolver clenched tightly in her hand. They were ready to face the men from Dead Rock Canyon. They were ready to fight for their lives. They were ready to protect each other. The riders approached the ranch, their horses kicking up dust and gravel. Thorn recognized Jedediah Stone in the lead, his face grim and determined. He knew this was it. This was the moment of truth. He took a deep breath and prepared to fire. The battle was about to begin. The riders stopped just outside the fence, a dozen men on horseback, their faces hard and menacing. Jedediah Stone dismounted, his eyes fixed on the house. He was a large man, with a thick beard and a cruel smile. He carried a shotgun, its barrel gleaming in the sunlight. "Whitmore," Stone shouted, his voice booming across the yard. "I know she's in there. Hand her over, and we'll leave you alone." Thor didn't respond. He remained hidden behind the window, his rifle trained on Stone. "I'm not going to ask again," Stone shouted. "Give us the girl, or we'll burn this place to the ground." Still, Thorn remained silent. He knew that giving Serafina to Stone was a death sentence. He wouldn't do it. He would fight to the death to protect her. Stone sighed. "All right, Whitmore," he said. "You asked for it." He gestured to his men, and they spread out, surrounding the house. Some of them dismounted and took cover behind the outbuildings. Others remained on horseback, their rifles raised. The tension was thick in the air. Serafina stood beside Thorn, her face pale but determined. She gripped her revolver tightly, her finger on the trigger. "Ready?" Thorn asked, his voice barely audible. "Ready," Serafina replied. Stone raised a shotgun. "Fire," he yelled. The air exploded with gunfire. Bullets shattered the windows, ripping through the walls of the house. Thorn and Serafina ducked for cover, returning fire as quickly as they could. The battle had begun. Thorn fired his rifle, hitting one of the riders in the chest. The man screamed and fell from his horse. Serafina fired her revolver, hitting another rider in the leg. The man cursed and stumbled. Stone and his men returned fire, their bullets whizzing past Thorn and Serafina's heads. The house was under siege, surrounded by enemies. Thorn knew they couldn't hold out forever. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they wouldn't give up. They would fight to the last bullet. They would protect each other. He glanced at Serafina. She was fighting bravely, her face set with determination. He was proud of her. She had come a long way in a short time. She was no longer a frightened waitress. She was a warrior. The battle raged on, the sound of gunfire echoing across the plains. Thorn and Serafina fought side by side, their courage fueled by desperation and love. They would not be defeated. They would survive. They had to. The gunfight raged on, the air thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Thorn and Serafina moved from window to window, firing at the attackers. They worked as a team, covering each other, warning each other of approaching threats. Thorn noticed Stone trying to sneak around the back of the house. "Serafina, cover me," he shouted. He scrambled out the back door and ran towards the barn, using the outbuildings for cover. He circled around behind Stone, his rifle raised. "Looking for something, Stone?" Thorn said, his voice cold. Stone whirled around, his shotgun raised. Thorn fired his rifle, hitting Stone in the shoulder. Stone cried out in pain and dropped his shotgun. Thorn moved closer, his rifle trained on Stone's chest. "It's over, Stone," he said. "Tell your men to surrender." Stone glared at Thorn, his face contorted with rage. "I'll see you in hell, Whitmore," he snarled. Suddenly, one of Stone's men emerged from behind the barn, firing his rifle at Thorn. Thorn ducked for cover, the bullet whizzing past his head. Seraphina saw what was happening and ran out of the house, firing her revolver at Stone's man. She hit him in the arm, and he dropped his rifle. Stone saw his opportunity and charged at Thorn, tackling him to the ground. They wrestled for control of Thorn's rifle. Seraphina ran towards them, her revolver raised. She fired, hitting Stone in the leg. Stone screamed and released Thorn. Thorn quickly regained his footing and pointed his rifle at Stone's head. "It's over, Stone," he said. "Tell your men to surrender, or I'll kill you." Stone looked around at his fallen men, at the battered house, at the determined faces of Thorn and Seraphina. He knew he was defeated. "All right," Stone said, his voice defeated. "I surrender." He shouted to his men to lay down their weapons. Slowly, reluctantly, they obeyed. The gunfight was over. Thorn and Seraphina stood side by side, their bodies bruised and battered, their clothes torn and dusty. But they were alive. They had survived. They had defeated the men from Dead Rock Canyon. They looked at each other, a mix of relief and exhaustion on their faces. They had done it. They had fought bravely, and they had won. "We did it," Seraphina said, her voice trembling. "We did it," Thorn replied, a hint of a smile on his face. They had faced their fears, and they had emerged victorious. They were no longer afraid. They were stronger than they had ever been before. They were survivors. The silence that followed the gunfight was deafening. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the bullet-riddled walls of the house and the groans of the wounded men. Thorn and Seraphina stood there, catching their breath, their bodies aching, their minds reeling from the violence. Thorn surveyed the scene. The ranch was a mess. Windows were shattered, walls were riddled with bullet holes, furniture was overturned. Several of Stone's men lay dead or wounded on the ground. Stone himself was nursing his wounds, his face a mask of anger and defeat. "What'll we do with them?" Seraphina asked, her voice quiet. "We'll tend to their wounds," Thorn said. "Then we'll turn them over to the sheriff." He knew the sheriff was corrupt, but he had no other choice. He couldn't just leave the men to die. They spent the next few hours tending to the wounded, bandaging their injuries, giving them water. It was a grim task, but they did it without complaint. As they worked, Thorn realized something important. He and Seraphina had saved each other. He had protected her from a man from Dead Rock Canyon, but she had also saved him. She had given him a reason to fight, a reason to live. She had pulled him out of his despair and shown him that there was still hope in the world. He looked at Seraphina, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes filled with compassion. He had never met anyone like her. She was strong, brave, and kind. She had faced unimaginable horrors, but she had never given up. "Thank you," Thorn said, his voice sincere. Seraphina looked at him, her eyes questioning. "For everything," Thorn said. "For helping me. For saving my life." Seraphina smiled. "You saved my life too," she said. "We saved each other." They both knew it was true. They had formed a bond that could never be broken. They had faced death together, and they had emerged stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, the sheriff arrived with a posse. He took Stone and his men into custody, promising to bring them to justice. Thorn knew that Stone would likely get away with his crimes, but he didn't care. He had done everything he could. The sheriff thanked Thorn and Seraphina for their bravery and offered them his assistance. Thorn declined, saying he just wanted to be left alone. As the sheriff and his posse rode away, Thorn and Seraphina stood in the ruins of the ranch, looking at each other. They were tired, shaken, but they were alive. They had survived. "What now?" Seraphina asked, her voice hopeful. Thorn looked at her, his heart filled with love and gratitude. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to spend the rest of his life with Seraphina. He wanted to build a new life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and happiness. Now, Thorn said, we rebuild. The next morning, the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Thorn and Seraphina emerged from the house, their faces tired but hopeful. They began the long process of cleaning up the ranch, hauling away debris, patching up the walls, and boarding up the windows. It was hard work, but they did it together, their efforts fueled by a shared sense of purpose. They were rebuilding not just the ranch, but their lives as well. As they worked, Seraphina couldn't help but feel a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had escaped the horrors of Dead Rock Canyon, and she had found a safe haven with Thorn. What will you do now? Thorn asked, as they paused for a moment to rest. Seraphina looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know, she said. I have nowhere else to go. Thorn hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. You can stay here, he said. With me. Seraphina's eyes widened. Are you sure? She asked. I'm sure, Thorn said. I want you to stay. This place, it's been empty for too long. It needs someone like you. Seraphina smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. I would like that very much, she said. Thorn reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. They stood there for a moment, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with hope. We have a lot of work to do, Thorn said, breaking the silence. But we can do it together. And so, they began to rebuild their lives. They repaired the house, planted a garden, and tended to the cattle. They worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Seraphina brought life back into the ranch. She filled the house with laughter, with music, with the smell of freshly baked bread. She brought joy back into Thorn's life. Thorn, in turn, gave Seraphina a sense of security and belonging. He protected her, cared for her, and loved her unconditionally. He gave her a home. They were both healing from their pasts, finding solace in each other's company. They were building a new life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and happiness. The ranch, once a symbol of Thorn's loneliness and despair, became a symbol of their hope and their future. It was a place where they could be safe, where they could be happy, where they could be together. It was home. Years passed. The ranch flourished under Thorn and Seraphina's care. The fields were green and bountiful, the cattle were healthy, and the house was filled with warmth and laughter. They worked together, side by side, their love for each other growing stronger with each passing day. They were no longer haunted by their pasts. They had found peace and happiness in each other's arms. One day, a young boy arrived at the ranch, his face covered in dirt, his clothes torn. He was an orphan, his parents killed by outlaws. He had been wandering the plains for days, searching for food and shelter. Thorn and Seraphina took him in, offering him a warm meal, a soft bed, and a loving home. They named him Samuel, and he became their son. Samuel brought even more joy into their lives. He was a bright, energetic boy, full of curiosity and wonder. He loved to help Thorn with the cattle, and he loved to listen to Seraphina's stories. Thorn and Seraphina raised Samuel as their own, teaching him about hard work, honesty, and compassion. They gave him the love and support he needed to thrive. The ranch became a haven for those in need. Thorn and Seraphina opened their doors to anyone who needed a helping hand, offering food, shelter, and kindness. They were known throughout the territory for their generosity and their compassion. Thorn was no longer a lonely, isolated man. He was a husband, a father, a friend. He had found his purpose in life, and he was grateful for every day. Seraphina was no longer a frightened waitress running from danger. She was a strong, independent woman, a loving wife, and a devoted mother. She had found her place in the world, and she was happy. Together, Thorn and Seraphina had built a life filled with love, laughter, and happiness. They had overcome their pasts, and they had created a future filled with hope. They were no longer alone. They had found each other, and they had found a family. They were home. As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, Thorn and Seraphina sat on the porch, watching Samuel play. They held hands, their hearts filled with love and gratitude. They knew they were blessed. They had found their happily ever after. The end.